Aboriginals, our first people. BC is a mountainous province with many rivers and lakes. There are four main rivers, the Columbia, Peace, Fraser, and Skeena, and two large mountain ranges divide the province, the Rockies and the coastal mountains. These large barriers separate people and create many different cultures. Four main regions are the coast, the northern interior, the northeast, and the southern interior. Within these regions, there are 30 different languages. Resource gathering was very important for daily life's spiritual purposes and ceremonial use. Hundreds of different plants were used and harvested by hand or with basic tools. Harvesting some plants was often a group task, and there was also a spiritual element. First Nations thanked the tree for its resources. Like a lot of things with First Nations people, catching of fish was a cooperative effort. Different fish required different methods to catch them. Large nets were used and an intimate understanding of the waters required. Hunters were very smart. They needed to develop tracking skills as well as knowledge of the territory. They needed to be skilled in the art of the bow and arrow and also in trapping to hunt their primary sources of meat, caribou, moose, and deer. The potlatch is the center of First Nations economy. It acts as a bank. When you give to the potlatch, you will get back in interest whatever you gave. The potlatch is a ceremonial feast at which possessions are given away to display wealth. Nations of BC had the most active and expert traders of their time. They relied on trade so much because they had a variety of resources. Salmon and oolakan were great resources of trade, which were traded on trails that were well maintained and 2 meters wide, called grease trail. They also traded for status goods, which were used to enhance the standing in the community. A large copper shield was seen as the ultimate sign of wealth, as well as obsidian and dentalium, a special shell. First Nations first made contact with Europeans when a Spanish spy was checking up on the Russians. After that came Captain Cook. Once trade with the Europeans began, they spent less time gathering traditional resources and more time trapping and preparing furs. First Nations changed their traditional settlement patterns depending on where the trading posts were. Before capitalism, First Nations traded furs in return for blankets, guns, and metal goods. The gold rush brought thousands to BC, the majority American. In fear of manifest destiny, James Douglas took charge. BC was later named a colony of Britain. Unfortunately, First Nations in BC were only given 10 to 20 acres of land, compared to 160 on the prairies and 80 in Ontario, continuing racial discrimination. The most devastating influx was the disease they brought over, such as measles, smallpox, and influenza, devastating 90 to 95% of their population. In 1884, the potlatch was banned due to the fact the church did not see the spirituality, only giving away wealth. The BNA Act gave the federal government control of Indian affairs and the provincial control of land use. Joseph Trutch denied them Aboriginal title. The Indian Act in 1876 gave the government legal power to control the lives of First Nations and identified them as status Indians, not allowing them to buy alcohol, own land, or vote. It also gave them a Euro-Canadian bound council, throwing off leadership. The First Nations often resisted the Indian Act, protesting and setting up blockades. In the 1880s, miners were coming onto First Nations land. The First Nations later set up a toll for being on their land, then began a roadblock, stopping miners in Fort St. John. The government was forced to sign a treaty, creating Treaty 8. Self-determination is very important to everyone. In the culture of First Nations, the UN and the government give them the right to self-govern, and that shows up in 3 ways in First Nations society. Nation government is one group with one overall language. They control their land base and is consistent with their trade, beliefs, and views. Public government is all groups in one region. Located primarily in Nunavut, it is dependent on trade. Community of interest is located in urban areas. They rely on their government and the city to provide services. Then, that's it. Go away. Don't play